Okay, Darren, thank you for joining us.
Yo,
So really, I mean, I've had the pleasure of dining at Dewakan, I think about 10 years ago now, 12 years ago, when you were still at the university.
we can't be 12. We just celebrated 10 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So maybe I feel older than I am. But yes, when you were there.
Longer than it should be.
It doesn't feel that long. It just feels like we have evolved from there, right? It's been a journey uh, since those years. What was that like opening up Dewakan there, and why there? Why at that college? I know you're working a lot with students because you felt there was a lot of you had to change the system, not just with what's in your head, but in kind of the future generation of people who are going to go into kitchens all across Malaysia and worldwide.
No, actually, it's a little bit more simplistic than that. I mean, I got back from Singapore, and I think I was looking at opportunities, and education was one that was open to me. So I took that because I think the proposition for it was a little bit interesting at the time. Um, and so I did that for quite a few years. And then I felt I've had enough of that and I wanted to explore something else. And in me, I had this notion that the pantry for ingredients in our country, or at least in this part of the world, right, was largely unexplored, largely unexplored, and was for me an interesting proposition as a cook, right? And so that's when I had the itch to that's where the itch felt it needed to be scratched, and that was the conceptualization of what Dewakan is today. Then, as I was about to herald an exit, I I think the people at the university, two in particular, Miss Kitty and Mr. Oliver, who were my bosses at the time, mooted the idea like, okay, so what if we did something that you wanted to do, but we do it at this new campus that we're building? And that intrigued me, and I said yes, and that's how we started.
So, like nearly all of your ingredients on the menu are from Malaysia?
A significant amount, yeah, I'd say up to about 80, 85%, depending on the menu. So sometimes, I mean, I'm not shy to use ingredients that are not from the country if it helps to deliver the message, right? But every main ingredient has been something that we've sourced from the country. But we're also talking about political lines, right? So we're like talking about also Sarawak and Sabah, which is
Mhm.
a different climate altogether, and then on the peninsula. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've tasted everything from caviar that was sourced uh, in Malaysia. You have pork also, like heritage varieties, heirloom varieties of vegetables as well, of meat. It's an incredible array. So, when you first start to have this vision that you want to explore Malaysia's pantry with a little bit more depth, a little bit more scope, how hard is it as a restaurant that wants to meet a certain level of quality, a certain consistency in the dish that you put up to build that, supplier, to build those suppliers, to build those growers, those, sources?
I think that's a really nuanced question. I think first of all, I think most chefs that come and and see what we've been doing, and they enjoy the meal at the restaurant, would primarily say that we are all kind of deranged and psychotic to have taken this up as a challenge. But that's one, and then the other is also recognizing um, that in the sphere of what we're doing, there isn't anybody, or there hasn't been anybody who's done that prior, and it required a lot of building up. So it has been, and it continues to be quite difficult. Some things are a little bit easier, and also I think more importantly, it has forced us to adjust our reckoning and our understanding of how supply chains work. When we work with different communities, it's important to remember and realize that it's not necessary that they have the same values and the same sort of threshold as you would have. So you're really looking at two worlds kind of like finding a way to merge and to benefit off each other. Us in the restaurant and other communities who see the resources that they have and would like to also sort of like monetize it, right? And therefore we've had to come to a recognition that we have a set of values that are important to us to run a business, or the sort of like lofty ideas that we might bring to the table, and they have a set of values based on the kind of needs that they have and the kind of resources that they have. And so I think like that's been, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but I think like it was just something that we had to unlearn and then kind of like relearn.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think also when you look at Malaysia, right, a lot of when you look at wild ingredients, foraged ingredients, there's also that socio-economic kind of line that runs through, right? Like a lot of the foraging is done by indigenous communities. So how I find that it's always this, when you're a two-star restaurant, you are serving these ingredients to an audience that can afford to be there, to be in that space. And that also you need that support system for your craft, right? But how do we ensure that these ingredients that are discovered, that you share, that you put out there in the world, doesn't then become something that these foraging communities, these indigenous communities still get to enjoy moving forward?
Yeah, it's a real tough one, right? But I think we're not at that point right now because um, we we've not even begun to creep into that threshold just yet. We're one restaurant in a small country that doesn't get enough visitors anyway to support the current businesses that would even imply to put some of these ingredients on the menu. So I think that conversation is an important conversation, but it's an important aspect to bear in mind moving towards this next, towards the next threshold. Right now, I mean, I don't profess to champion it, right? Like I'm at an age where I I think we look too hard and too extremely for someone to go on a crusade somewhere, and I'm not on any crusade, right? I think like in the sphere that that I'm in the sphere that I can contribute, in the sphere that I can influence, this is where I will try my best and allow that to organically sort of like grow. And I think where we are right now is to bring recognition to some of these ingredients. We're at a deficit level in terms of recognizing the importance and the strength of the indigenous communities here. We're in a deficit level, right? I mean, if we talk about indigenous communities around the world, it's not very different. The hardships that indigenous communities go through around the world is not different from the ones that our indigenous communities are going through. So it's already deficit. I feel that every expense of resource or every expense of effort is helping us to climb this very slippery cliff anyway. Because now when someone comes in from another country and they sit down in the restaurant and we speak about, this ingredient or that ingredient, and there's always reference towards some sort. I mean, you've experienced it as well when we take you on the tour and we show you the ingredients and we say, this is what we're doing with it, but this is how indigenous communities do it, use it, and what do they use it for, and if it's medicinal or if it's seasonal, etc., etc. So, I think because we're already in a deficit and because there is so little acknowledgement of um, their importance in the environmental and also socioeconomic structure of our country, everything we do and every effort that we claw for, it's going to help um, raise some sort of awareness, I suppose, or at least some sort of acknowledgement of the strength of what they have been, of what they have, both hereditary and but also looking towards the future.
Mm. No, no, absolutely. And I think the key term here is acknowledgement, right? Like
Gotcha.
it's wherever you get inspired, wherever you find the source. I think like if you have a platform, then it's always to give acknowledgement from where it comes from, the people who came before you or the people who are around you, I guess. That's
Yeah. I mean, the discussion about this is, in such a touchy era as well. It's, I mean, are we appropriating these sort of
mm,
ingredients? And the reality is that they're ingredients, at some point somebody's going to use them. Are we appropriating rice? Where does rice stem from? Are we
mm.
appropriating saffron? Where does that come from? So I mean, like in terms of food, culture overlaps each other, and that's where the richness is, and that's where the sort of um, wealth of the story of which food gets moved around and transferred around, and just I mean, our mutual friend Ivan is Crossroads Cuisine. I mean, like just thinking about that is mind-boggling, considering where ingredients come from and where they're going. And I think that in itself is such an intriguing sort of narrative.
Not being so held back by tradition or the way something has been done, or it's about the
I mean,
evolution food.
yeah, I mean, what is tradition? I mean, like you can debate this authenticity thing till, we're all a shade whiter. But what is tradition? I mean, tradition is literally a snapshot of an experience that a group of people are experiencing at the moment, right?
Mm.
Because tradition will change and it's fluid, and it's not only is it fluid, it's dynamic, and you welcome it, right? And there's some things that you want to hold on to and it's merely for nostalgia, but at some point, nobody in the history of humankind is gonna say that foot binding was a great tradition.
Mm.
Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? Like it was what it was for the time. It was a snapshot, and you move on. And I think it's similar to say the same of food.
I mean, both of us are products of a diaspora, that has moved away, right? And in some ways clings very hard to tradition, and in some ways is so far away from it. So
Yeah,
the food will be the same.
if we pursue this conversation, I mean, like, I don't want anyone to change my grandmother's mean curry recipe. I absolutely don't want anybody to touch it. But at the same time, the thing that she used to cook was also went through so many iterations given, where she was and where, she came from Kerala and where it was cooked there. And then, when she moved to Kuala Lumpur, it's gone through a different change. And, so it's and if you trace it far back enough, would what we are eating now be the same as what we've eaten before? And that's a very good question.
No, but
What
even
was it
if
like
you
before spice?
Yeah, but even if you cook that same dish right now using the same ingredients, it's
Yeah,
already going to be different, right?
yeah,
It's
and
just
so absolutely. So it's impossible to put like some sort of authenticity label on something. We look at Pranakan cooking and just think about the countless amounts of books that are available for it. for straight Chinese Peranakan. And how it varies, because it varies from grandmother to grandmother. The matriarch determines what is the original recipe. And if you have like 12 matriarchs in the village, they all determine what the original recipe is. And who's to say it isn't? Because it is. And who's to say it's not authentic? Because it is.
Yeah. I remember even like the spice paste, like they used to have a spice meal and they would have like fish curry, but like 50 different kind of fish curries based on the 50
Absolutely.
different grandmothers, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, my grandmother would be like, she would go through, she'll buy the spices, the coriander seeds, cumin, the dried chili, and then she'll go through the process of airing it out. She packs all of it into bags, and then we'll get onto the bus with her, and we'll go to like the mill in Ipoh Road, and she'll grind that, and then she'll pick it up, and put them back into like old Nescafe bottles, the glass ones, and which already have like that label, and that's what she was in. So there was there was a few Malayali families where we used to live. And there was another Malayali family, and they're all very good friends. But when you eat at all of these restaurants, at all of these homes, right? They're different. They're like completely different. The biosum is different. The neighbor is different. The casery is different. The upuma is different. What is authenticity? Um,
Mm.
yeah,
Hey, I mean, food used to be so much more fun as well, like just going around to different relatives' houses to, have a different variation.
absolutely.
So, but speaking of these ingredients and how ingredients travel, you have this thing where you say before the chili, what was Malaysian cuisine before the chili, right?
Well,
So,
actually, it was not just Malaysian, but like the whole of the Southeast Asian region, right?
mm,
Because the whole Southeast Asian region is defined by heat and the use of the
mm,
chili. And the question, well, it's actually a question that was posed to me when I when I met this wonderful gentleman called Edin Coons. He's been a friend for a long time, and the first time I met him, and I was describing to him what was in my head about Dewakan, and he posed that question, like, what was this region eating before the chili? And it's such an interesting thing because the chili is, despite being a fruit, has become so quintessential to the social construct of how our communities are built, right? And I cannot imagine life without a chili. And so, having said that, the pursuit then of what ingredients were here before that has been intriguing to me because we don't have reference to it. We don't have a snapshot of um, what our cultures were eating before that, and that's been the premise of the restaurant. So I guess the only sort of like imagination or anything that comes out of my imagination would be to pursue what is indigenous to the land, um, and to pursue what cultures that predate us were using it and how they were used.
yeah, I mean, I remember researching like, old recipes pre-colonize, colonization in India, in Vietnam, these kind of places. And as you say, what we have access to, most of us, is what's written in English a lot of the time and what's been written in the last 200-300 years. And that has chili very much a part of these recipes. But if you look at a chicken recipe from 1,000 years ago in Kerala or 500-600 years ago, in sambar, no chili, right? It's black pepper, it's all these other spices, but no chili. So what are your highlight ingredients? You have a glossary on Dewakan's website, which also lists some of these kind of ingredients. But what are the star highlights for you?
I don't have any highlights, to be honest. I think they all kind of pose different challenges, and that's what intrigues me and what's interesting to us at the restaurant. When you get something and you have no idea how to cook it, and it is a lot of the things coming through the restaurant, and then the guys who, from indigenous communities, they'll say like, this is slightly poisonous. You have to treat it well. It's like, slightly poisonous, yes, lawsuit waiting to happen. And you kind of, yeah, so I think navigating through that has been really the most rewarding part about the restaurant I mean, in the cuisine that we're because we're able to take this completely unrecognizable to us and completely foreign, which is the paradox, right? Which is the dichotomy. It's like it shouldn't be foreign, but it's like completely foreign to us. And then dissect it and find a way to make this not only just palatable but intellectually stirring. I think like that's been the greatest sort of like expense of our effort. So if that was the methodology, then everything becomes interesting, and there isn't like sort of like a star thing, because we're not approaching food from the position of like consumption. We're approaching it from the consumption, from the approach of investigation, right? And therefore everything just becomes a little bit more thoughtful. For example, you've not had this menu, but on the menu right now we have a tart, and it's just called. I mean, it looks like a simple chocolate tart, but the ingredient that it's a warm chocolate tart, and the two ingredients here that I think are quite interesting. We've got like the hearts of palm, which we've processed in a way that it becomes a tart shell in an exceptionally crispy tart shell. And then we put in something called, what we call it a dabai lat, right? Which is basically a non-cacao chocolate. And we use the kernels of the dabai seed, and it's conched to a point where it becomes of a chocolate material, and then we make that into like a pseudo ganache, and we put that inside, we warm it. And it's a very simple dish, but you finish that. Well, okay, it's not simple, but yeah, it's simple, but it's complex at the same time. But you finish your meal with that, and I think like that's a fascinating proposition.
So, like you brought that to the Kita event at Synthesis recently,
Yeah.
right? And there was a spread, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then there's this thing of, so chocolate prices have gone up in the last at least 3 times in the last year. There's a shortage, and then you think, okay, like could this be, could Malaysia be the answer to this shortage and have an alternative that's out there? And I think I remember asking you, would you commercialize this, you think? Would you have a startup that's going to be the anti-cacao kind of thing?
Yeah.
As someone who has a spirit of an artist, whose main kind of purpose, main drive seems to be curiosity and kind of, investigation, right? When you come across this kind of an ingredient and you see possibly the commercial potential for it, how do you respond?
I think the biggest thing is really, first of all, I think from a problem solving perspective, what we're not addressing the problem. Now, the reason why cacao went through all of that was really because it was a crop that was beaten to death, right? It was just dragged through the mud. It was monocrop to a point where it was a weak gene pool. And so why did we arrive to that situation in the first place? The reason why we arrived to that situation was because there's an over demand for it, or whether it was from the market or whether it was from producers or something, right? But there was an exceptional demand for it, and the production couldn't keep up. And basically the plant decided that, okay, look, I've had enough. I'm going to shut down. I'm going to get diseased, and I'm going to get, this is me. This is me giving up. I'm on my last legs, right? And that stems from the fact that it's overused and overworked, and what we're not addressing is the overconsumption. And what happens when we replace cacao with tabai, or we replace it with spent wheat, or spent beer, what do you call that? What happens with that? The same process just goes over and over again. And what happens is we just be depleting the resource, delaying one resource, you're delaying one depletion of the resource and moving to another, and then you delay that one and you move to another. So I think the approach first is to understand that we are consuming more than we should. And that's because we're so disconnected from the production of whatever it is that we're consuming. And that's the first part. The second thing would be, one of the reasons why I wouldn't really look into it, is simply because this would be an act of substitution, right? And just substituting something, for namesake, would then where do you draw the line? And things, and you would just multiply, and then you end up with the same sort of like problem again. I guess that's my take on it.
I mean, I think every time people talk about, like, now, worldwide discussion on resilient food systems, it's always about replacing something that is either not doing too well, like cacao or coffee,
Yeah.
or something that's so intense for climate, like meat, right? With just another problem, kind of.
But what we're not doing is we're not looking at the bandwidth of what we should be eating, right? We're still looking at very hyper-focused industries and very hyper-focused resources that are being toiled to a point where it's at the brink of, shattering and falling apart. That's what we're doing, but not what we're looking at. We're not looking at all the other things that we could be eating. Things that are within our reach. I mean, if you're in the middle of the Sahara and you say you don't have anything to eat, I'll buy that. Okay, I'll understand that. But if you're anywhere else in the world, okay, not anywhere else in the world, but in most places in the world where there is human population, there is access to food and a variety of food that you can eat. How do you explain what do you use to explain the distribution of, Wagyu beef all around the world? Like, why is there such a huge demand? But why are we just only eating this? There is alternative. I mean, there are things in our historical dietary formation that we are no longer eating simply because it's no longer fashionable. All right, and maybe that's what we should be looking at. Maybe that's what we should be visiting.
But, like, okay, I mean, you see this everywhere now when we talk about this, right? Like, the same ingredients worldwide being eaten by everybody.
Yeah.
And okay, so there's two things, I guess. One is people don't cook as much at home, and when they do cook, they only know how to cook some very simple things. But we also see the blossoming of restaurants, right, across the world, even from high street to Michelin level, and they all want to cook the same ingredients. Right, your Wagyu, your cod,
Yeah.
avocado.
If you look at that, just to address that one, that's really recognizing that a restaurant is a business, right? So it has to react to market, and there are very few who can do otherwise. There are very, very few, and regrettably, food is commodity, right? And it's treated as such. So that's one. And the other is about cooking, and where people who have reduced their home cooking or have oversimplified it. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that they are not connected to the production of the resource. When you're not connected to the production of the resource, you then tend to be a little bit more careless about how you use the ingredient, right? Because I'll give you an example. I mean, if we all raised chickens, for example, would we be so carefree about how we eat the chicken or how we eat the eggs? If we grew our own corn or we grew our own rice, would we be so careless about how much we throw away? So I think that access to the production, and I um, it's difficult to navigate because in many places people have, because of the density of where most people places where or the density of where most people live, the access to land, actual land, and co-opt land, cooperative land, where you can then produce your own is so limited because of density, right? Like, I mean, you can say this government policy or this the way that hive hives live and etc. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can say about it, but essentially because we don't have places that we can grow things and nurture things, that has changed the way that we view food, and it's changed the way that we look at food. My my my, my country is and has an enormous amount of waste, food waste, coming from raw material to cooked material. Like if it was, I mean, I can't remember what the stats are, but it's ridiculously enormous. Simply because it's accessible. It is so accessible. You get good vegetables, you get good fruit, I mean, locally grown ones, and at a very accessible price to most, not to everyone, but to most. And because of that, it has driven this sort of like carelessness about how we view and look at ingredients.
So, do you think, I mean, this is a big question, but do you think food is too cheap?
Dude, that's a tough one. Um, uh, I think there are two sides of the fence to this, right? Like, I mean, if you have someone who's been hungry for like 4 or 5 days, and that's a reality in a lot of our countries, um, and Malaysia being one of them. I won't speak for other countries, but I know at least in our country that hunger is a problem. It can never be too cheap, right? But if you're also sitting on the 48th floor of skyscrapers, and serving fine dining meal, can it be really that cheap? Like, I think it's hard to unravel that without. It's hard to unravel that if you without taking more than one perspective.
Mm.
And so I don't think food's too cheap. I think the food that we have chosen for ourselves in the place that we are, for like in my position, yeah, I think that it's underpriced. I won't say it's too cheap. I think it's underpriced because there's a lot of effort that goes into it, and producing good food is also good ingredients. Um, Go back to the farmers and the decisions that they make to produce good and wholesome meals. And I think like that truly is quite underpriced.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a very complex kind of statement, right? Like, farmers should be able to get paid more for growing better produce.
Yeah.
All facets of society should have access to healthy, nutritious food that is also familiar and relevant to them, But sometimes I think, like, I mean, you sit in a space where you're sourcing for regenerative ingredients, you're already able to pay that price point. We're talking about more, I guess, in urban cities, right? Urban areas, because in rural environments, most people have a smallholder plot where they're growing their own food to a certain extent. So in fact, have a lot more access to nutrition. But I think it's this kind of dichotomy of food is cheap, but rarely nutritious
Yeah,
in cities.
absolutely. I mean, like nutritional density in the ingredients that we get these days. I think well, we were at that when we were at that seminar the other day. He said that the amount of spinach that you require for iron and 30 years ago and what you eat now is almost quadrupled, right? And it's a bit ridiculous considering, but then that's what you get when you're like mass producing food, right? I think I read also this book by Dan Barber called The Third Plate, and
Mm.
we're talking about the wheat and how the dust, what was it called? The dust bowl, and
Mm.
how the wheat in the prairies used to the root structures used to go really deep, but because it was difficult to replant, they had to sort of like create wheat that has got shallow roots and therefore also not being able to pull the kind of nutrients that it should have. And and I think it's hard for us to tackle that at a macro problem without giving up on very important aspects. I mean in terms of policy, I mean you have like the dichotomy there also is that you have in most places two ends of the spectrum in terms of food consumers, right? Um, I mean, if we consider at every local supermarket, we just think about the price of chicken, which is the most accessible meat available. If we look at the um, the price point for all of that, I don't know what is it for us, and maybe say in NSK, it's gonna be like it's cheap. Like, I can't remember. And maybe at fair price, it's heavily subsidized, right? Um, but why?
Yeah.
Is it subsidized? I'm not sure.
No, it's not subsidized. It's not
Oh, it's
subsidized.
not. Okay. Is it relatively
It's fair price, but it's not subsidized.
okay?
It's fairly priced.
Fairly priced. Okay. But why is that as well, right? I mean, we actually count the cost of the production and the abattoiring and all of that. Like, I mean, like how do we come to these prices? They're exceptionally low, like given the resources that have been put in to grow it, right? And why? Because it has to also feed different parts of the population. So I think in terms of policy, I think it's a very hard question to answer. And I think earlier on also, like how I mentioned, I guess a lot of this discourse has then also sort of like determined this idea that I think being on a crusade for some of these things can be very counterproductive and it also desensitizes you to a lot of things because there are a lot of people who don't have access to this and there are a lot of people who don't have access to food. And if you're with like some sort of lofty, like I said, tower 48th floor, and then running some fancy fine dining restaurant, you know it's paradoxical. Like it's not something that that
Yeah.
speaks to the crusade, I guess.
No, 100%. I mean, I remember like FAO made it the year of the millet, I think a year or two ago, and then I was like, I was in like South India and then I was in Africa and I was like, they were like, we don't want to eat millet, like we want to eat burgers. We want to, like
Absolutely
have
true.
natural.
Absolutely true. I mean, we there's this notion that especially like with indigenous people, I mean, with indigenous communities that we work with, okay, not with indigenous communities, but with people who come to us with this romantic idea that, indigenous people want to eat all the food that they get from the jungle, and it's not wrong because some of it is pretty tasty and they do, but they also have aspirations, they also want to have access to good restaurants or they want to have access to good product and to assume that they want everything from the jungle because the jungle is the ever providing spiritual entity. I think like that's false. I mean, I think it's also not only false but it feeds your romantic idea. It's not reality. um,
Mm.
and so then I wouldn't fault them at all if they are able to take the resource that's been that's been with them for generations and then converting that into some sort of monetary um, some sort of money that they can then spend and have the choice to spend. It's not a question of like they want things. It's a question of like they want to have the choice to make that decision. And I think that's important. That's all what all of us want also anyway, right? Like be able to have to make that choice. Um, and I feel like this romantic notion gives everyone a very skewed idea of what the relationship we should be nurturing within the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you said, like we all sit in this space, you know, where we are aware of this, all these juxtapositions, right? You're inhabiting a place, as you said, on the 48th floor, you know, with a fine dining restaurant. Your clientele, there's the people you get your ingredients from, the larger observations of the food system, and trying to just do your bit, right? In one way. So how do you find that the curating of the ingredients at Dewakan, the curating of the menu? How often do you guys change your menu at Dewakan?
Not often enough, I think. um, Generally, it lasts about a year. Um, yeah, the menu lasts about a year, and that's really because a lot of effort goes into conceptualizing the dishes, finding the ingredients, and every day it's a constant sort of juggle to you know chef, this ingredient no more in season. How come no more in season? I thought it's supposed to last until September. Yeah, then they say no more already. Oh, then we have to start again, and then we have to look at, but do we get a substitute? Should we use the stuff that we've been preserving? Da, 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 da. So it kind of like, it goes through a lot of these mini side quests.
Mm.
So it takes about a year, I think. Yeah.
But then like in the 10 years, right, of doing what you're doing with Dewakan, you've also done so much to build that infrastructure, working with farmers, kind of investing into that space so that you can also have a good supply.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
We have a supply better than most, I'll say, but which is also very dynamic. Um, the space that we occupy has, let's just say that some of the things that we want at the restaurant is, you can't have businesses to build solely on one business lah. For example, I'm trying to say that, if the demand doesn't grow for a particular product, um, that a vendor or that supplier, that farmer is going to find themselves very soon out of job, because it's difficult to build it just based on the needs of Dewakan alone. And then also, if Dewakan changes menu next week, then what happens to all of that? We've worked with, companies like with people like Pete from Little Farm on the Hill, Pete and Lisa. They've been great friends of ours. We've worked with them for about 10 years. We've worked with Ning from Chocolate Concierge for about 10 years. We've worked with the guys up at Langit for about 9 to 10 years as well. So there are some of these businesses that have stayed for as long as they have. But then there are other businesses who also have come and gone. We've worked with communities within indigenous groups that also have come and gone. They've moved on to different things. So it's always constantly a carousel, and some people jump on and some people jump off. But what we've kind of perfected is the way that we approach these. So it's very internal. We are no longer the center of the universe. As when we first started out, we thought we're the center of the universe. Everybody should send to us, blah blah blah. It's not that anymore. Now we understand that there is a fluidity in the way that we acquire some of these ingredients, and if we can get it, we get it. We can't get it, then we move on. If we can support someone, we'll support. If we can't support, we'll move on. The one thing that we don't do is we don't haggle for price. When it comes to products that we know have got value, um, we will not try to drive down that price, especially if we know that it has to be foraged. Because man, foraging in Southeast Asia ain't fun. Some trees that have, it's like, I mean, they have to go in, even if you think about trekking a kilometer in one direction, in Malaysia it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, go through brush, go through this, fight with monkeys. Okay, you don't fight with the monkeys, but you have to get there before the monkeys get it, or before the wild boar get it, before the jungle squirrel gets it, before the mouse deer gets it. So there's a lot of moving parts, I suppose. So that, I guess, and then that makes us a little bit more tolerable lah, I suppose, and they are okay to work with it. So with us, so we have developed, like, some relationships. We also, with some people who bring things in from Borneo. So because we're good paymasters in that sense, they prioritize our needs, and that has helped adjust our stance. And I mean, like, you spend enough time in the kitchen in a restaurant, you always feel like suppliers owe you everything. But in our case, we've decided that that's not even the case, because they are also contending with nature. And so we all kind of like have to find this synergistic sort of approach to it.
The menu, is it determined by the ingredients, or do you decide the menu first, or like an item on the menu, and then you look for the ingredients?
It starts off with a couple of ideas. We look at ingredients. I mean, like, because we're not like temperate countries seasons, right? So we can afford to have certain things all year round. We also get to have things in bulk, and then we process it to a point, that we can preserve it. So those become building blocks. Again, the investigation into what is interesting to us is kind of what determines the dishes. Some things are just going to be. Some things are seasonal, but because of knowledge that we get from the indigenous communities, we also learn that they're preserved, and we learn how they preserve them. But it's not necessarily how we use them. But because we learn that they can preserve them, then therefore we also then find a way to preserve it ourselves.
So, I mean, you've spoken at a lot of forums and panels, but now you also run Kita for the last few years, which is to create a platform, and you get to get these stories out, showcase also other people who are have a similar approach to food, I guess, in different facets. What was your vision for Kita, and where do you see it going in the next few years?
That's another tough one.
It's not
The vision for Kita was always that there is a monogamy with the conversation that revolves around food. And it was always from the point of the consumption. And we never talked about who produced the food. We never talked about who produced the ingredients. We never talked about what happens if we are continuously on this tangent, right? I mean, at the time when we were like putting this down to paper, Lisa and I, Lisa's the co-founder, good friend of mine. At that time, everything about food on media was about finding the next hidden gem, or the next, rising star. It was always about that. It was who was on what list, and who, and food became a checklist of things, right? And when that happens, when it becomes a checklist, when people are no longer inquisitive about or no longer willing to take a risk about having a bad meal at a restaurant or trying something completely new, it became about consumption. Whether it was consumption of media, whether it was the consumption of the actual meal, whether it was the consumption of the experience, that was all it became. And we felt that there are so many people around who have important things to say, who have important um, um, thoughts and expertise around it, around different areas of food, and we wanted to build a community around that. And that's what kita means. Kita in Malay means us, right? Or we. And that was what it was. That was where we came from. Where it goes in the future, I think, will be also interesting, because I think we also see the world changing with the approach to restaurants and the approach to food. I mean, fine dining restaurants um, are harder to maintain. They're also losing a little bit of luster, I suppose, in a sense. And they're also great smaller restaurants. We find people paying more attention to indigeneity. We find people paying more attention to tradition and bringing that up and elevating that. So I think that the course of direction will need to correspond with that. And so I don't think that we need to have the yellow brick road for kita. I think it'll be flexible and just see what makes sense for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the world that we inhabit is so fixed and linear in its approach. Having, I think, creativity and food, if you're really doing it in harmony with nature, it's biodynamic, it's organic, it's kind of, it turns and it weaves as it goes, right?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think also that I think that linearity is unavoidable because that's how people respond, right? Like if the decision-making process is occupied with other things that have priority, then the other things that don't have priority would be the path of least resistance. And with things like media, that's just where people will go. I mean, like that's how you kind of like dictate that. But I think on the fringes, and in between the cracks, there are a lot of amazing things that are happening, and I think you just have to kind of like tap into that sort of like raw energy that's there. And you're bound to find a new mycelium circuit because it exists and it's very expensive. It's very expensive. It goes into so many different directions. And having these sort of conversations allow you to do that. Being a part of these conversations puts you in touch with this person, puts you in touch with that person. Because I will have a knowledge that you don't, and then you will have a knowledge that I don't, and then we exchange that. And you will say like, oh, have you heard about this farmer who was doing this and this and this? And I thought I read this article about how you could take this and you can transform that into this. And then Ivan will pop out of nowhere and he'll say like, oh, but did you know about this and this and then this? And
oh, you do a very good imitation of Ivan.
yeah, exactly how he does it, right? With the eyebrows. But I think like that makes it exciting, and that was what makes Dewakan exciting. That's what makes kita exciting. That's what makes the community that I've had the opportunity and privilege to be a part of exciting. I mean, a discussion like this with you particularly could have easily have happened at the doorstep of Dewakan, and instead of like right here, because this is literally how we talk and this is literally how we communicate.
Yeah, it's true. And I think also finding like kita really, I think going to Dewakan, when I first went to KL, my friends were like, oh, you have to go try this restaurant, must go. It's in the middle of nowhere because it was quite far at that time to go to the college. But
So
I have to go, you know. And then years later with Kita, and it's this, as you said, right? People always find each other, you build a community, and then you create a platform and people with a similar mindset. But also it's I think after a few years or 10 years, you know, or longer in what you're doing, it's also about impact, right? You want to get the message out there and but you mentioned, you know, let's go back to diversity. You talked a lot about diversity, how if we ate with a little bit more diversity, less monocropping, you know, it also requires a certain level of skill, right? What other traits you think like people need, chefs especially, to be able to like incorporate a bit more diversity and creativity into their menu with ingredients?
from a skill standpoint, I don't think a lot, to be
Mm,
honest. I think the perseverance and inquisitiveness is probably a little bit more a stronger trait. For example, you can literally just stir fry anything and everything, and with the right combination of flavorings, and with the right combination of like what's available to you, most of it could taste very, very good. It's only a process of elimination and say like, okay, like, you know what, I didn't like this one, I like this one. And then you move on. Like if you can stir fry everything, I'm pretty sure you can also steam everything, right? And if you can steam everything, I'm pretty sure you can bake everything. So I think the skill set doesn't require for you to be at some level. I think like everything else, the skill set you build together with your experience. In the same way that if we, how can Asian chefs, or yeah, let's just say Asian chefs, and I might be generalizing here, but how can Asian chefs be more apt at cooking a carrot than cooking, say, banana blossoms, right?
mm,
I find that hard to believe because so besides that, I mean, like if it took you some skill and it took you some investment on your part to learn to cook the carrot before you learn how to. So I mean, if you could take that same sort of approach, then you apply that to like a banana blossom, then the sky's the limit, right? Then you just learn how to do everything. That is literally how we design menus at Dewakan. It's just we take it and we just do everything to it. And
mm,
after a while, you get a bit better with recognizing what you can and what you cannot do. Um, and I mean, at some point, we've just deep fried everything. Like,
yes.
what happens if you deep fry that? And it's just like, okay, what happens if you deep fry that? You just deep fry everything. And at some point, you find something like, oh, we can use that. And then you saw that into the bank, your memory bank. And at some point, you realize that, hey, remember that time when we did this and this and this? Let's do that. We used to make ice creams out of everything.
Mm,
Roselles, mangoes, petai, so just like everything. Fish, squid. Uh,
mm.
yeah, not all of it was good. Some of it I'll never return to ever. But you 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 now have like a mental note of it, and that will connect with all the other synapses, and somehow something can come out again.
So just being like open to experimentation, not always expecting food to be perfect, I guess, right?
I mean,
Like,
before it gets to the guest, it has to be as close to perfect as we can make it, lah, right? Before it goes to the guest. But for us, yeah, it really is about this sort of like having fun with food. Azmin Saini, who used to reside in Singapore, used to be a writer, um,
mm. He's in Paris now with his copper pots.
right? Envious copper pots. I said I want him. I want it in your will to be to me. Um, so Azmin, I think during one of the COVID years, wrote about the laksa sikla,
Mm,
which is different from the katong laksa. Um, And so it's interesting that, you know, Singapore has got two types of laksa, uh, of either Peranakan or Malay origin. And during that time, during COVID, we couldn't open for business. So I saw the post and I messaged him and said, hey, what if we can I get the recipe and we'll try that out, right? And so he sent me the recipe and we made it and we sold it. Um, just because it felt like a fun thing to do. And we had no reference point at all except for Z, right? And also, I mean, and it's not like he could come here and taste it and tell us if it was on point or not. We just made it. But that was an interesting experience for all because we were exposed to a new laksa that we've never had before. And also, it was cooking in the dark. And I think that that has to be interesting. The one thing that I think hinders people from cooking at home is that they have this idea that things need to be complicated. They don't need to be complicated. They can be complicated when you're ready for it, but only if you're ready for it. Like if you are compelled to, you know, get the gilling out and grind spice by hand because you feel it adds to what you want to do, then you go ahead and do that. But if you feel like you go and get like an alagapas or a bawas powder and it makes sense to you, then just do that, right? Because either way, the result is not that it has to be. It's the result is not always about it being completely tasty. The result also is about you enjoying that process. If not, why go through all or go through all the struggle of nurturing someone? You know, if you don't like it, the guy's not gonna like it as well, right? So you want to be able to bring that process and involve someone into it, and first you have to enjoy it as well, right? Because if you don't enjoy the cooking, at whatever level, if you don't enjoy it and you don't find a sense, because cooking is really about there's a lot of instant gratification there, right? If you do it well, you make a nice cut, you sear the burger well, you made your own patty, you know, there's a sense of accomplishment and there's a sense of like, oh, I'm in control of what I put through in my mouth. And that's a real nice feeling to have.
But you know, but you're saying about that instant gratification. I was thinking that the reason more chefs or more people know how to cook a carrot than banana blossoms is for a long time, if they shared that they made like really delicious carrots, they get a lot more words of affirmation than if they said they made delicious banana blossom. People are like, what is this weird thing? But we're seeing that change, right? More and more. So, I mean, we're going to wrap up soon. Last question, I guess. But you know, you've got your green label, the Michelin green leaf now.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the restaurants who talk about sustainability, it's yes, but how they source their ingredients, where they source their ingredients. But with Dewakan, I feel very strongly it's also cultural sustainability, it's biodiversity, right, in your menu. So where do you see chefs in this kind of intersection where they sit, where food is not just food, but also in the impact it has on climate and where we go from here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't have the answer, bro. I have like
See,
zero
great. I'm glad I
answer.
asked the question.
um, but I do feel that um, I do feel like if we take the time to take a step back and make small changes, right? Like do the small things. Eat low down the trophic system, eat a variety of what's available from around you more than you did yesterday. I think we're at a step in the right direction. Like I think it's just a little steps. We cannot expect a culture like ours, especially the Southeast Asian region, which had a forced economy in the past 40 to 50 years, right? And absolute escalation. I mean, with escalation came the aspiration to eat different things. And then after they come to a point where we say, like, oh, you know what, everything that we've been doing for the past 40 years has been wrong and we should be doing it differently. It's difficult to do that. And I think it's also, and I think people get offended by it, people get a little bit hurt by it. And when you have someone who's hurt or offended, they're not going to change for you or for anyone, right? So I think like winning over people, it's not about preaching. And I don't think that 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 would be very effective at all. I do feel that in incremental steps, and probably it's not going to be fast enough or effective enough. But I think if we can come to a critical mass of people who believe that incremental steps will help, I think we'd be able. It's better because then you'd be able to affect like a larger mass, rather than to have like very focused people only wanting to eat a certain type of thing because of the impact that it has on the environment. Because in the end of the day, we're not trying to save the earth. We're trying to save mankind, and that's different. Because the earth,
Marvel quote. Sorry.
no, because the earth the earth is gonna outlive us, right? It will just change form, and it'll be fine. It's us who are on the chopping block, not the earth. You know, when we talk about sustainability, we are hardly talking about whether the earth is gonna outlive us. Dude, the earth is gonna outlive us, all of us, right? It's us that's got a problem coping with the fact that we're going to be diminished in the next 1,000 years or less. So incremental steps, and I think that helps.
Agree. And I think also, like as you said before, if food is fun and delicious, then it's a very easy way to communicate change.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it is absolutely. That is the perfect way to say it. Because it's like when you're dealing with a kid. Okay, I mean, I deal with kids with tantrums, right? Like my two boys, like they're in tantrum mode. You're not gonna get anything across. It's just not gonna come across. And if you want to be able to affect some sort of change, we need to have listening ears. People have to want to pay attention, and you can't do that by saying thou shalt nots, and you can't do that by saying that oh, what you're doing is going to destroy this and this and this and this, because everybody just get into defensive mode. So what's wrong with having a kinder word or giving them a real reason to want to make a change?
Agree.